Good afternoon. Welcome. Thanks for coming. My name is Eric Cosman. You can see here on the slide. I'm a consultant with ARC, part-time consultant with ARC. Part-time consultant is euphemism for old retired guy. So I've been working with ARC now since I retired, I guess about 8 years. And before that, had a long and rewarding career in the chemical industry. So we're going to talk today. You're familiar, I think, now with the workshop format from this morning. I've got 3 panelists that will be helping us out. And we're going to talk about secure cloud and edge OT architectures, which when they asked me to chair this panel, I thought, oh, okay, that's good. That's a topic that I don't really know a whole lot about. I don't think that jargon really existed very much when I retired, but that's okay. I can fake it. So I did a little research, and you're not here to listen to me anyway. I'm just more the moderator than anything else. So without further ado, let's get started. Whoops. This slide I just put up, I'm sure you've met these gentlemen. Probably some of them are in the room. These are the other 3 members of the ARC cybersecurity team that I work with. So we have Mark Lucif, Larry O'Brien, me, and somehow Sid's not on there. Why didn't Sid get on there? Huh, okay. Sid, I apologize. I took this slide from somebody else. I took it from Sid, that he wouldn't put his own picture on there. That makes sense. Also, the obligatory thank you to our sponsors. You've seen this slide this morning, so these are the companies that have really come through for us and help us put on this event. As Sid has said, it wouldn't be possible without their support. So I took these quotes from the session description for today. And by the way, I should pause for a moment. Just if I cough here and there, I'm getting over a cold. And there's a medical term, I think it's called post-viral cough or something like that. I read about it last night, and it said it can last up to 6 weeks. And I thought, oh God, I hope it doesn't last 6 weeks. But so anyway, getting back to the topic. We're here taking from the session description, I just pulled a couple of quotes. To help end users understand the factors that are driving developments in this area and the approach that companies are adopting, and you can read the rest of this, basically to do the necessary architectural changes. I am, getting back to me for just a moment, since it does have that A word on there, architecture. I like to call myself a recovering system architect. I was a system architect for my previous employer for 20 years, so pretty familiar. I tell people I was doing architecture before it was fashionable. And then the second quote, accomplished through a moderated discussion. So we're a workshop here today, so if you went to the sessions this morning, you'll be familiar with the format. It's very conversational, very interactive, and the idea is for the panelists to share their insights and experiences and take your questions and have a dialogue. So I'd encourage you to not to hesitate to ask questions and ask for expansion or additional information on any of the topics or the various nuances. So here are our panelists, and I think I've got them in no, they're not exactly in order, but here to my immediate right, Dan Locker. It's Locker, right? I want to make sure I pronounce everybody's name properly, who's a senior cybersecurity manager at Dow. Dan and I were chatting just before we started, and I said when I look at the Dow attendees at these events, I've been coming to these events for more years than I care to remember, and I always look at the Dow attendees list, and the list of Dow attendees with whom I worked gets shorter every year, and the list of people that came along behind me gets longer every year. Dan's on the latter list. We did not have a chance to work together, but he's from Dow. That's good enough for me. And then at the extreme end here at the far right, we have Kenny Mesker. I think some of you might saw him and heard him speak this morning, joining us from Chevron. And then Jared from ExxonMobil, another architect here in the middle. So these are your panelists. I've got a few slides that I'm going to go through, but you don't have to listen to me drone on. That's not the purpose of this session. But I just want to, as is custom in these sessions, to sort of set the tone. So, of course, no presentation these days would be complete without some mention of ChatGPT, right? So, so I thought, let's ask ChatGPT, and you can see the quotes that I got pulled out from this long dissertation on the subject. Pretty, I guess, coherent. Coherent, not terribly insightful, but what can you expect? But the goal here, obviously, is to protect these systems, the systems we're talking about, from unauthorized access, manipulation, or disruption. Well, and this, the latter part, is the key to this phrase, allowing them to perform their intended function. So whether your term of choice is OT or operations or industrial control systems or what have you, you can do, security is important, but not if it interferes with the prime directive. We've all heard the phrase, the most secure system is one that's shut down. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to make money with something that's shut down. So I pulled this as part of my research, again, just to help me understand some of the terminology. So as you can see here, cloud computing in the general vernacular is a host of devices, all manner of complicated and multifaceted devices talking to the cloud for storage, computation, and analytics. And then in the case of edge computing, now you've got the cloud connected to devices at the so-called edge. And I love the terms that get introduced. I've been in this business for a long time, and I'm always fascinated by the jargon and the metaphors that are used. Edge and fog, and I don't know if people use mist, and start sounding like a Stephen King novel. But it's the various metaphors people use for this stuff. When I think of cloud and edge and fog, and my first reaction is amorphous, which means that we probably don't really understand this, but we can kind of shade it in and speak about it collectively and do a lot of hand waving, right? So, but the design considerations, as you can see some of the design considerations here, obviously device security, because I've been, like I said earlier, I've been in the business for a long time, and it used to be the devices were pretty simple. Now there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions maybe of devices that you're dealing with. And so security of those devices is important. Identity and access management is never far from our consideration. Data encryption, of course, is a factor in many cases. Nowadays, it's pretty much baked into everything that all the communications that is done. Compliance, or if you prefer conformance, another term that's used, they're not exactly the same thing, but basically those are considerations. Risk management. As you know, in the OT space or in the operation space, risk management is extremely important. I didn't give a bio or a background to myself, but one of the things that I do on a volunteer basis is I co-chair the ISA 99 committee that's principally responsible for the 62443 standards. And we talk a lot about risk management in those standards, and the differentiating factor in operation system being the consequence element of risk. Threats and vulnerabilities may be common, but the consequence are different. And I'm going to be giving a talk later this week to some ARC staff people this is a bit of a divergence, but the subject of the talk is, it was originally titled A Day in the Life of a Chemical Plant Worker. It was to teach or familiarize some of the ARC staff that did not have a lot of practical plant experience about what life is like in operations. And when I was putting the slides together, I was reminded the site that I worked on for many years, our offices were just outside the gate, and they had a sign out in the gate when you drove into the site, and it said, "This is a chemical plant. Things are different here." And that encapsulates the consequence part. This is a chemical plant, things are different here. And ask what the differences are. And I look out here and I see Don and Mark and others and with experience comparable to mine, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's risk management. Of course, network security and incident management, because no matter how hard we try, we're never going to prevent every incident from happening. And there's always a spirited debate about what is a cyber incident, right? Is it an attack? Not necessarily. It could be a fat-fingered attack, if you will, an honest mistake, but undesirable things happen, which constitutes an incident. So with all of these in mind in the security context, as I said earlier, consequences is what basically makes the difference. And we've all heard these. I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's all of the kinds of nasty things that could happen, which are different or maybe more severe than might happen in a typical information technology application. You'll see their confidentiality is not on that list because that's just part of information security. But some of these other things, and of course, when you're dealing with, getting back to that statement about chemical plant, things are different here, hazardous materials, environmental impact, equipment damage, and so forth, make the potential consequences a little more scary. I was, again, personal story, years ago, earlier in my career, I had the rather unique experience of being in the middle of inside of an integrated chemical complex when it lost all power. And you talk about a scary situation. All of these plants with hazardous materials and fear of loss of primary containment, and guys out there with pickup trucks shining lights on valves so they could move them manually. And that's let's just say that the pucker factor is pretty high, okay? So it makes you very acutely aware of the consequences. So some of the guidance, the good news is, like I said, I've been doing this now for a long time. I've been involved in what we call OT cybersecurity now for, I guess, more than 25 years. There's a lot more practical guidance available, and I just put up a couple just as examples, and I'm sure you're familiar with those. And now the challenge we have is to adapt those and apply them in the face of this rapidly changing technology, because we're talking now about edge and clouds, and you know, people say, well, you know, what's different about IIoT? And the principles are really just the same. The technology changes, but the principles are the same. It's solid engineering know-how, and in the face of changing technology. So if I put in a plug for our committee, the committee that I co-chair, we're about to, well, we've put out one version for comment, and we've developed a technical report that's basically examining the confluence of IIoT and industrial cybersecurity. And when we chartered the group, I charged them with two questions. I said, first question is, what are the implications of IIoT on industrial cybersecurity? And the second question is the reverse, which is, how does industrial cybersecurity influence the deployment of IIoT? And so they put out this first version for comment, and we'll eventually publish it as a 62443 technical report, and done a great job. But the purpose of that exercise was to tell us in the committee how must we adapt the standards to change to that evolving environment. Again, the measures are many. This is just a list, but you see the et cetera at the bottom. There's all kinds of things that we have to, techniques and methods and technologies that we bring to bear. I don't think there's anything there that bears specific mention. And then starting to wrap up here, these are some references for your reading pleasure. These are all hyperlinked in the presentation, but for example, I came across in doing research for this session, the CISA, U.S. government organization's Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture, and then some of these other reports and analyses on the subject. And the list goes, you know, I'm sure ChatGPT can consolidate all of this, but the list, if you just do a network search or an internet search, you'll get this kind of stuff. So that's it for me. And I've given the panelists the opportunity to have a few opening words. I don't think anybody's prepared slides, but we'll allow each one of them to give some opening comments, and then we'll start the discussion. So